For over 3 centuries, from the late 8th to the 11th century, a remarkable people emerged from the harsh lands of Scandinavia to reshape the medieval world. They were the Vikings, warriors, traders, explorers, and settlers, whose influence stretched from the frozen shores of North America to the bustling markets of Constantinople. Their longships struck fear into the hearts of coastal communities across Europe. Their axes and swords carved out kingdoms. Their traders established networks that spanned continents. But they were more than just raiders. They were farmers and craftsmen, poets and lawmakers, explorers who discovered new worlds. This is their story, the complete saga of the Vikings: blood, steel, and glory. The Viking Age began not with a single event, but with a perfect storm of circumstances that would change the world forever. In the late 8th century, Scandinavia was a land of dramatic contrasts. Towering fjords cut deep into mountainous coastlines. Dense forests covered the interior. Harsh winters tested the endurance of all who lived there. The Norse people inhabited small communities scattered across Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. They farmed the limited arable land, fished the cold northern seas, and raised livestock in the brief summer months. But population growth created pressure. Limited farmland meant younger sons often inherited nothing. Families grew larger, but the land did not expand. Something had to give. At the same time, Norse shipwrights achieved a technological breakthrough that would change history. They perfected the design of the Longship, a vessel unlike anything the world had seen. These ships were masterpieces of engineering. Long, sleek, and shallow-drafted, they could navigate both open ocean and shallow rivers. Their flexibility allowed them to bend with the waves rather than break. Their light weight meant they could be beached on any shore or even carried overland between waterways. With this technology, the Norse suddenly had the means to reach distant lands. The Atlantic Ocean, once a barrier, became a highway. The traditional start of the Viking Age is marked by a shocking event that sent tremors through Christian Europe. On June 8, 793 AD, Viking longships appeared off the coast of Lindisfarne, a small island off northeastern England. Lindisfarne was home to a wealthy monastery, a center of learning and Christian devotion. The monks never expected an attack. Monasteries were sacred spaces, protected by divine authority and respected even in times of war. The Vikings had no such reservations. They descended on the monastery with devastating efficiency. They killed monks who resisted. They seized treasure, silver chalices, jeweled crosses, anything of value. They burned buildings and left the monastery in ruins. The attack shocked all of Europe. The scholar Alcuin wrote to the king of Northumbria, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race." The heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God like dung in the streets. This raid announced the Vikings' arrival on the world stage. It demonstrated their maritime capabilities, their disregard for Christian sanctity, and their appetite for wealth. It would be the first of countless raids to come. What began with isolated raids quickly escalated into systematic campaigns of conquest and permanent settlement across vast distances. The Vikings didn't follow a single strategy. Different groups pursued different goals in different directions. But together, their expansion reshaped medieval Europe and beyond. Norwegian Vikings looked westward across the North Atlantic. Around 870 AD, they discovered and settled Iceland, a volcanic island with fertile valleys and abundant fishing. They created a unique society, governed not by a king but by the Althing, an assembly of free men that became one of the world's oldest parliaments. Iceland became a stepping stone to further discoveries. Around 985 AD, Eric the Red, exiled from both Norway and Iceland for murder, sailed west and discovered Greenland. Despite its forbidding name, Greenland had areas suitable for farming during the medieval warm period. Eric established 2 settlements that would endure for centuries. Then came the most remarkable journey of all. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed from Greenland and reached North America. He established a settlement at a place he called Vinland. Archaeological evidence confirms this achievement. At Landsok Meadows in Newfoundland, researchers have found the remains of Norse buildings, proving that Vikings reached North America 500 years before Columbus. Danish Vikings focused their attention on England and the Frankish Empire. In 865 AD, a massive force known as the Great Heathen Army invaded England. Unlike earlier raids that sought quick plunder, this army came to conquer and settle. They succeeded beyond imagination. By 878, the Vikings controlled most of England. Only the Kingdom of Wessex, under King Alfred, resisted. After years of warfare, Alfred and the Viking leader Guthrum agreed to divide England. The Vikings would control the Danelaw, a huge territory where Norse law and customs prevailed. In Francia, Vikings besieged Paris multiple times. In 845, they extracted a massive tribute from the Frankish king. In 885, 700 Viking ships, carrying perhaps 40,000 warriors, laid siege to Paris. Though they failed to capture the city, they terrorized the region. Eventually, the Frankish king made a calculated decision. In 911 AD, he granted the Viking leader Rollo a large territory in northern Francia in exchange for his conversion to Christianity and promised to defend against other Vikings. This became Normandy, land of the Northmen. 2 centuries later, Rollo's descendant William the Conqueror would invade England and change history again. Swedish Vikings, meanwhile, looked eastward. They traveled along the rivers of Eastern Europe, the Volga and the Dnieper, deep into lands that would become Russia. These Vikings, known as the Varangians or Rus, established trading posts that grew into cities. Novgorod, Kiev, and other settlements began as Viking outposts. The very name Russia derives from Rus, reflecting this Viking heritage. Some Varangians journeyed all the way to Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire. Byzantine emperors recruited these fierce warriors as elite mercenaries, forming the famous Varangian Guard. These Norsemen became the personal bodyguards of Roman emperors, a remarkable journey from Scandinavian fjords to Mediterranean palaces. The key to all Viking success was their ships. Without the Longship, there would have been no Viking Age. Viking longships were revolutionary. They combined seaworthiness with flexibility in ways no other vessels of the time could match. The most famous type was the Drakkar, or dragon ship, named for the fearsome dragon heads carved on their prows. These vessels could carry 60 to 80 warriors, along with supplies and weapons. Viking ships were built using a method called clinker construction. Overlapping wooden planks were fastened together with iron rivets, creating a hull that was both strong and flexible. This flexibility was crucial. In rough seas, the ship could bend and twist with the waves rather than break apart. The ship sat remarkably shallow in the water. A fully loaded longship drew less than 3 feet. This meant Vikings could navigate rivers far inland, appearing suddenly where defenders never expected seaborne raiders. Longships were also light enough to be carried. Vikings would beach their ships, then drag or carry them overland to bypass obstacles or reach another waterway. This portability gave them access to vast river networks throughout Europe and Russia. For propulsion, longships used both sail and oars. The large square sail could harness ocean winds for long voyages. But when the wind failed, or when navigating rivers, warriors manned the oars. Navigation was perhaps the Vikings' greatest maritime achievement. They had no compasses, no charts, no instruments. Yet they crossed the open Atlantic Ocean, traveled from Scandinavia to Constantinople, and always found their way home. Viking naval tactics emphasized speed and surprise. They would approach a target quickly, beach their ships directly on shore, raid with overwhelming force, and escape before defenders could organize a response. Viking warfare and culture were inseparable from their religious beliefs. To understand the Vikings, we must understand their gods. Norse mythology was complex and sophisticated, a complete cosmology that explained the world and humanity's place in it. At the center stood Yggdrasil, the World Tree, an immense ash tree connecting 9 different realms. Its roots and branches stretched through all existence. Every part of creation was connected through Yggdrasil. The gods themselves were remarkably human in their characteristics. They weren't all-powerful or all-knowing. They made mistakes, felt emotions, formed relationships, and faced their own mortality. Odin was the All-Father, king of the gods. He was the god of wisdom, war, death, poetry, and magic. But wisdom came at a terrible price. Odin sacrificed his own eye to drink from the well of wisdom. He hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, to gain knowledge of the runes. Odin welcomed the greatest warriors to his hall in Asgard, Valhalla. Those who died bravely in battle were chosen by his warrior maidens, the Valkyries, and brought to Valhalla. There they would feast and fight every day, preparing for Ragnarök, the final battle at the end of the world. Thor was Odin's son, god of thunder, strength, and the protector of both gods and humans. He was the most beloved god among common Vikings. Thor wielded Mjolnir, his mighty hammer, which always returned to his hand after being thrown. Freya was the goddess of love, beauty, fertility, war, and death. Love and war both required courage and passion. Freya claimed half of those who died in battle, taking them to her hall, Folkvanger. Loki was the trickster god. His cleverness saved the gods countless times, but his malicious pranks caused constant problems. Eventually, his tricks went too far, leading to tragedy and his imprisonment. Vikings believed that destiny was predetermined by the Norns, three powerful beings who wove the threads of fate. Even the gods were subject to fate. Yet, despite this fatalism, Vikings believed strongly in personal courage and honor. How you faced your fate mattered. Dying bravely in battle earned a place in Valhalla. This belief system shaped Viking behavior profoundly. Courage was the highest virtue. Dying well was more important than living long. Personal reputation was everything. The Vikings possessed a writing system that was both practical and magical. The runes were far more than a simple alphabet. The earliest runic alphabet, the Elder Futhark, contained 24 characters. Each rune was designed to be easily carved into wood and stone. By the Viking Age, it had evolved into the younger Futhark with only 16 runes. Each rune had a name and represented a concept beyond its sound. Fehu meant wealth, Uruz meant strength, Thurisaz meant danger, Ansus meant divine power or Odin. Runes could be used for both writing and magic. A rune master could arrange runes to invoke their symbolic meanings. Carving certain combinations could bring protection, victory, or healing. Vikings carved runes on their weapons, shields, and ships. They wrote runes on jewelry for protection and good fortune. Runestones were erected throughout Scandinavia to commemorate the dead and record important events. These stone monuments serve as Viking history books, letting the Vikings speak to us directly across 1,000 years. Beyond runes, Vikings used many other sacred symbols. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, was the most common amulet. The Valknut was Odin's symbol, 3 interlocking triangles representing slain warriors. Viking society was hierarchical, but more fluid than rigid feudal systems elsewhere. At the top were the Jarls, powerful nobles who controlled large territories. Kings were essentially the most powerful Jarls. The middle class, the Karls, formed the backbone of Viking society. They were free men and women who owned land, farmed, and could bear arms. Most Vikings were Karls. Karls participated in the Thing, the local assembly where free men made decisions and created laws. This tradition of participatory democracy was unusual for medieval Europe. At the bottom were the Thralls, slaves. However, slavery was not necessarily permanent. Thralls could sometimes buy their freedom. Women in Viking society enjoyed significantly more rights than their counterparts elsewhere. Norse women could own property, inherit land, divorce their husbands, and represent themselves legally. When men went raiding, women managed farms and households. Some women were skilled traders. The legendary shield maidens fought alongside men. Personal honor was paramount. Being accused of cowardice or dishonesty was worse than death. Vikings would risk their lives to defend their reputation. Despite their fearsome reputation, most Vikings spent far more time farming than fighting. Viking communities centered on the longhouse. Daily life revolved around agriculture. Vikings grew barley, oats, and rye. They raised cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. The harsh northern climate meant preparation was crucial. Summer was a frantic race to preserve food for the long winter. Meat was smoked or salted. Vegetables were pickled. Vikings were skilled craftspeople. Blacksmiths, jewelers, carpenters, weavers, and leatherworkers created everything the community needed. Social life centered on feasts, especially during the long winter months. A successful Jarl demonstrated his wealth by hosting elaborate feasts with vast amounts of food and mead. The most valued entertainers were skalds, poet-singers who preserved history and elevated warriors to legendary status. Viking warriors were feared throughout Europe for good reason. Their weapons were well-crafted and deadly effective. The most common weapon was the spear. Spears were affordable, versatile, and highly effective for both throwing and thrusting. The sword was the weapon of wealth and status. A well-made Viking sword could cost as much as a small farm. Named swords held great significance, passed down through generations. The axe was the quintessentially Viking weapon. From simple hand axes to massive two-handed battle axes, they were devastating in combat. For defense, Vikings used round wooden shields. The shield wall was the foundation of Viking battle tactics. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, presenting an impenetrable barrier. Body armor was expensive. Wealthy warriors wore chainmail shirts containing 20,000 interlocking iron rings. Helmets were conical with a nose guard. The popular image of horned helmets is a complete myth. Berserkers were legendary warriors who worked themselves into a battle frenzy. They were feared even by other Vikings. Viking combat was brutal and personal. The goal was victory, by any means necessary. While their raids captured attention, Vikings were also among history's greatest traders and explorers. Viking trade networks stretched from North America to Central Asia. They established trading posts that grew into major cities. Dublin, York, Novgorod, and Kiev have Viking origins. Viking exploration was equally impressive. They reached North America around 1000 AD. They settled Iceland and Greenland. Varangians traveled east and reached Constantinople. The Viking Age didn't end suddenly. It gradually transformed as circumstances changed. Christianity's spread through Scandinavia was the most important factor. By the 11th century, Scandinavian rulers were converting to Christianity. Christian kings discouraged raiding fellow Christians. They promoted laws and order. They centralized authority. Europe adapted to the Viking threat. After 2 centuries, Europeans had learned to defend themselves. They built fortifications and maintained standing armies. The Norman conquest of England in 1066 is often considered the symbolic end of the Viking Age. Yet, Viking influence didn't disappear. It was absorbed into the cultures they had touched. In England, Normandy, Ireland, and Russia, Viking heritage persisted. The Vikings left an indelible mark on world history. They weren't merely raiders and barbarians. They were a complex civilization with sophisticated laws, rich traditions, advanced technology, and remarkable courage. They discovered and explored new lands. They established trade networks connecting continents. They founded cities that became major centers. Their shipbuilding and navigation skills were unmatched for centuries. Their literature inspired countless works through the ages. Perhaps most importantly, the Vikings teach us that history is complex. The same people who raided monasteries also established parliaments. Those who worshipped Odin also valued law and justice. From the discovery of North America to the founding of Russia, from Normandy to Iceland, Viking influence shaped the medieval world and echoes into our present. The Viking Age lasted from 793 to 1066 AD, just under 3 centuries. But in that brief time, these remarkable people from the cold northern lands changed the world forever. Their legacy is blood, steel, and glory. It's also law, trade, and exploration. It's courage in the face of impossible odds. This documentary is based on the book Vikings, Blood, Steel, and Glory by Daniel Loisel. If you want to dive deeper into Viking history, culture, and mythology, get the book now on Amazon at the link below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone interested in history. The Vikings may be gone, but their story continues to inspire us. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Viking Age. Skål.